exactly. This is the last night of the 2018 GitCon. Yeah, so sad. On behalf of Warwick, I want to thank all of you for showing up and make this event such a successful event for the companies. I hope for the YouTubers too, and I hope all of you are happy with the outcome from the GitCon this year. Are you? Very good. That's what I thought. Very good. So I'd say see you next year for the GitCon number 3 in September, October 2019. Ja, weiß ich. Shane and Rick will play Bibi Blocksberg later, just for her. Rick, you're on it, right? Oh, yeah. Okay, so hope to see you again next year. Thanks for showing up. Have a safe trip home. And for tonight's talk, we have the mighty Rickbeato on stage as a host. And after that, Shane and Rick from In the Blues will, of course, play the blues. Yes. So enjoy the evening. Have a safe trip. Thanks, everybody. See you.
Hey everybody, I'm Rickbeato. I'm going to invite up Mr. Adam Neely with me.
Hello, my name is Adam Neely. I'd like to invite Rickbeato to start talking right now.
So this discussion between Adam and I here, and all of you, is called Analog Feel in a Digital World. So I was thinking about this. A lot of people my age, I'm 56, complain about people not playing instruments and programming things and fixing things and DAWs. But I kind of have a different view on this. Back in the 80s, 1984 or so, MIDI was invented. Maybe it was 83. And people started programming drum machines. People started playing keyboard bass on things that were all quantized to the grid, even though there wasn't really a grid because there were no DAWs. But that began this journey to where we are now. Around 1999, DAWs started to become used regularly in recording studios, even though then you had to have a Pro Tools operator that you would need to pay extra money to, and they'd have a Pro Tools certification. And you'd have to rent the Pro Tools gear from the studios, usually $500 a day, something ridiculous like that. Then they came out with this thing called the Digi 001, Avid did. They were one of the first companies to come out with a home DAW that people could use and actually record albums with. Now, at that time, in the year 2000, I was 38 years old. I'd never engineered anything in my life, although I'd produced some records, but I always relied on other people to get sounds for me. And I realized the possibilities of using digital audio workstations, the editing possibilities. You could go in, you had a grid line, you could move things around. People still didn't really do beat detective yet. That's a way of quantizing things, rhythms. Doesn't have to be drums. But the possibilities were immense for what you could do. Now here's an old guy thinking like, that's going to put studio players out of business eventually. Or being a great player isn't necessarily going to mean that much because you can fix anyone's part, because Auto-Tune came out around the same time, that plugin, and I would use it to fix people's vocals that didn't have the budget to sit there and do a million takes. They only had X amount of money to pay. I'm a producer. I want it to sound good. So I had to fix their parts. And eventually, you know, I mean, Cher already had that big hit song, Do You Believe, which was...
In Life After Love. It's a great song.
Great song. So That was already, we were already hearing that. Long before T-Pain, we were hearing that effect being used. We didn't know how common it was going to be, but my perspective on it, a lot of people my age, though, say, well, you know, you're never going to get the feel of Phil Rudd on Back in Black. You're never going to get that John Bonham sound if you quantize the drums. You're never going to do this. You can't, you know, you're not going to have the feel of the Rolling Stones. It's got to be sloppy. It's got to be a little bit out of tune, you know, and they're right to a certain degree. But I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for things like digital audio workstations that enabled people to fix things, because I would not be able to apprentice as a beginning music engineer or music producer at 38 years of age if it wasn't for the fact that these things were invented to help people do things at home. Move that to the future. After 16 years of working, producing bands, from that time when I got my Digio 01, I bought Final Cut Pro, and I made my first video with it. I'd never really owned a camera before, but because of things like the iPhone, cameras they went everywhere with you. You're able to take these images, you put them in, you look at the wave files where the audio is, and it looks just like Pro Tools or like Logic. You make a cut, you move it around, you place things on the beat, just like you would do if you're editing audio, because you are editing audio. So once again, I was able to change what I did at 54 years of age, or 55 when I started doing this full time, doing YouTube, because of these advances in technology. But I still feel that it's important to have things that feel real. Adam?
Yes, I agree. So we were just talking about this. There's this clip on YouTube of the great bass player Anthony Jackson, who is an incredible bass player. He plays this like 36-inch scale. He calls it a subcontrabass 6-string bass guitar, and it's just the most monstrous instrument ever. He plays beautifully. He plays. There's some clips with him playing with Hiromi Uehara and Steve Gadd. And anyway, love the guy's playing. And there's this clip from 1992 where he is complaining about. It's literally called "The Rise of the Machines." And in The Rise of the Machines, he's on a talk show talking about how he is going to lose all of his work to people who program bass lines. And this is great, like, existential threat, not just to his career, but to music itself. And so, you know, it reflects this anxiety, of course, about a lot of the studio musicians at the time in the 90s of being replaced by people who could program drum machines and program
or repair
to the point where their skills were not necessary anymore. And so I found this rather amusing for a couple of reasons. I played this to a class of these like 17, 18-year-old jazz musicians. And it was on this like lecture I was talking about artificial intelligence and composing, which is basically this thing that, you know, a lot of Source Audio is the company, stock audio libraries start using, you know, artificial intelligence to like generate, you know, like ambient soundscape type things. And so we were talking about like what would happen if like artificial intelligence was going to eventually compose music. Are we going to be out of a career as musicians if artificial intelligence ever develops that ability? Maybe, I don't know. It's just something to think about. And so I played them this clip, and they all, of Anthony Jackson talking about this being the end of music, and they all laughed. Every single one of these 17 and 18-year-olds thought it was the funniest thing ever, the cringiest thing ever, because to them, the younger generation finds this era of music and era of music making so inspiring and so like fruitful to them, because they see technology being this very creative thing, not this thing that corrects musical performance, this thing that aids in musical discovery. The use of you know, MPCs and beat machines, the development of electronic music techniques, using like mixing in Ableton Live, doing all kinds of like augmented performances with electronic music and electronic instruments and real instruments. It's a very like exciting sort of time for young musicians in that regard. And it's a very scary time for people who aren't looking at the new technology as a means for developing new kinds of music. They're looking at the new technology as a means of making them obsolete. And that's the thing that I typically am thinking about here. Like, I look at the new technology, I look at the ability to, maybe not necessarily correct, but the ability to adapt. Misha Mansour, guitarist for the band Periphery, says that, I was talking to him once, and he said, he looks at recording music as composition versus as a record of one's performance. And that's something that I thought was kind of interesting, the idea that recording is just a different medium whatsoever from actually performing. And I think that's kind of like the direction it's been, and that's kind of what it is. It's another art form. It's not performing music, it's a means of composing. I guess that's my perspective. But yeah.
When I first started producing, I started right at the tail end of recording everything on tape. And what we would do is do pre-production, where you would rehearse with the band for a week or so, rehearse all the songs you're going to record, because you don't want to be wasting time. You want to get it as close as possible. They'd have to play with click tracks, and you weren't able to fix things unless you actually edited the tape. And nobody had the budgets to do that. But essentially, when you edit tape, you do the same thing you would do in Pro Tools or Logic, where you cut out space or add space between beats if you're fixing drums. And the idea of composing, about recording, and about that being the composition, that is something that I went to after I stopped doing pre-production. And I would just say, okay, let's just start recording. And we would rehearse, and we would record things. Then we'd chop it up, move sections around, and we use the tape machine, or the Pro Tools, is what I use, as a way to change the arrangements to get them the way that we're going to record. And then many times we would record them in stages, for example, which isn't that different from when people don't realize that on tape, it would be very common to record a verse with the whole band playing and cut pieces together. You take a chorus from one version, the Beatles did it. They put two different versions of Strawberry Fields that were in totally different keys together, and they have a huge splice in it. This went on with 4 tracks. It's been going on since the beginning of recorded music. People like to think that it's DAWs that were doing these things, but that's actually not really true. This has always been part of music. People did punch-ins forever, even in classical music. I remember somebody telling me they worked with Wynton Marsalis he did a classical album in the early 80s, and it was all on tape, and they did 350 punch-ins on it.
There's a Charles Mingus album that's probably one of my favorite albums of all time, The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady. And yes, it is a fantastic album. And there are so many cuts on that album, and it would not be the album it would be without all of the ridiculous splices and overdubs and all sorts of things. And I think it comes down to people looking at recorded music as being somehow a record of virtuosity, or a record of authenticity, or a record of something pure. And I think that sort of like is, it's artificial. It's the same way that like when we're vlogging or like taking social media pictures, and we're curating how we're coming out across to the world. And we're trying to make a statement with that. And it can be used for good or it can be used for bad. But like for recorded music, especially, there's this like, I don't know how to even really describe it, fetishization of the authenticity of recorded music. And it's never really been the case. Yes, ideally, if you just stick a microphone in a room and hit record and just play great music, it will sound fantastic. But at the same time, that's not really taking advantage of all the benefits of recorded music, at least from my perspective. You can do a lot more, so why not do it? And I think there's just this idea that recorded music should be pure and the authentic expression of something, but that's really that's really not what it is. I don't think so, anyway. But
I would have bands that would come in and say, we want to mount it to sound live. We want to get our live sound. I said, so you want it to sound bad? and usually always would be bands that were terrible live would always want to sound live. And I said, well, live is live, and making a record is making a record. And we're going to make a record. And making a record means that we're going to have things on there that you can't play live. The Beatles didn't play Sgt. Pepper's live, you know. The Beach Boys, I mean, nobody really plays their things live. They play live versions of the songs live. They don't do exact versions. If you're gonna record live, just go to a bar and put up a couple mics or take it off the board. But don't go into a recording studio. Recording studio is where you can actually be creative. Now, the idea, too, of studio musicians being out of business because of technology, in Nashville, there are a lot of studio players that don't work anymore. Guys that got triple scale 15 years ago don't work a lot because the track guy producers are what's big now. The Max Martinization, I just made up that term.
it's a good term.
Of music is what's happened to country music, where it's become pop music, where the producer creates the beats, if you want to call it that, and then they don't need any studio players because the guy that produces usually plays everything, and they come up with all the parts and they do that. Now that's been going on in pop music forever, but people still hire session guys to come in. The only difference is that they hire them and then they beat detect their parts, because many times they're going to want to, maybe go to some type of a drum loop or something, or there's that feeling that a lot of producers have that if it's not perfectly in time anymore, it sounds weird to people. And that is one of the things that has changed in music. That's why singers that I worked with up until 2 years ago like to hear auto-tune on their voice, because any imperfection that you used to just live with or not even pay attention to, they don't accept anymore because they don't hear any things that are out of tune on the radio anymore.
Well, I've actually had some conversations with singers about that, and they say that because recording technology and microphones are so crisp and so clear, the amount of saturation on the vocal tracks, 30 years ago allowed for the imperfections, and now the aesthetic is not to allow for the imperfections just because the recording technology picks up everything. What are your thoughts on that idea?
I don't agree with that, because things actually sounded, when I have multi-tracks of records that were recorded today and records that were recorded 50 years ago, and invariably things that were recorded, when I hear Chris Cornell, for example, singing on tape from Super Unknown, the isolated vocal tracks, they sound phenomenal. When I hear isolated vocal tracks of someone like Adele, for example, if you look, there was a great article that with the guy that mixed the record, the Mix 21, Tom, I'll think of it. He had a screenshot of his EQ that he had on the vocal, and in the EQ he was taking out 18 dB at 930 hertz. He was taking out 24 dB at 1.6K, and he was taking out something like 18 dB at 3.1K. Now, these are really narrow, like notch filters, for those of you that know anything about engineering. But the fact that you're able to do that, and these are incredibly offensive frequencies to the ear, which is why he went in there and did that. But you don't hear those things on, when I listen to old recordings, things off tape, I don't, things that have been digitized, when I listen to them in Pro Tools, I don't hear any of those artifacts that I would hear from people that I record. I mean, there's a singer with a big band I worked with, and I called him The Knife. I called him The Knife because he had 3.8K that would just go like an ice pick in your ear, drive you nuts, and you'd have to go in, and every E vowel, you'd have to go in and spot EQ it and take out that frequency, because it would be so offensive to the ear.
But that kind of, I feel like speaks to the idea that that's recording as an art form. Like you have to go in and edit. How do you have to, like, as a singer, do you have to cut that dB or cut that frequency in order to perform live, or like?
No, they kill you live.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, like, one of the things that I think is kind of cool that I've seen recently, and it really only affects certain styles of music, but definitely in electronic music and hip hop, the idea of the unquantized drum groove that's very, very popular, the J Dilla beat, which is kind of the anti-quantized beat, which people have really been leaning into. Recently, just in the past 5 to 10 years, is like kind of a means of, I don't know, maybe I see it as a rebellion against the hyper-quantized, everything has to be exactly on the grid. Like if the snare is slightly behind or slightly ahead, that's just part of how it feels. And I do see some young musicians and some people really leaning into that now as a means of kind of saying, "No, I don't like you're saying the gridification of music," but it's it's just, it will depends on the genre of music, I guess. Yeah.
So instead of taking questions here, which is not even on, I thought maybe we'd take some questions from the audience. Or at least I can't get the password on that.
So, back in talking about the analog days, right? Mm-hmm. Everything's representing a pure sine wave. Now we come into the digital DAW era. Back in the day, the A to Ds and DDAs weren't quite up to par. Now we're getting there. 192, 24, it's getting pretty good. But everyone's listening to the medium on an MP3 file format off of your cell phone. Where do you think the industry needs to change to get the technology that's here to represent the sine wave up to par with the consumer standards?
I don't know any big engineer or producer that records at 192. I know very few that record at 96K. Most of the old school guys that still work at 44.1, almost invariably. These are people in their 40s and 50s, but they're generally people that mix all the big records that you hear. They like to get things at 44K. They don't, so the fact that people listen to them on iPhones and on laptops, I'm one of those people. I have friends that make fun of me. I can't believe you listen to that on there. I'm like, well, I listen to it on there, so believe it. Yeah, I've got 10 pairs of studio monitors at my place, but that's not always convenient to listen to. So you need to be able to mix things so that they sound good on nice stereo, nice monitors, and so that they sound good on laptops. So I don't know. The file size, recording at 192 24-bit is not like recording in 4K. It's nothing like that. They are massively big files. People don't want to deal with that. If it's eventually going to go down to 44.1, or if they're going to be MP3s or MP4s that are at 256, or you're not going to get FLAC files to listen to. You're going to buy them. You're going to listen to them off of Apple Music. You're going to listen to them off Spotify, and they're going to be bit rate's going to be 320 or 256. And I'm one of these people that says you can't tell the difference. I did a video called Audiophile or Audio Fooled, and I said you can't tell the difference. I don't care who you are. I don't care how high you can hear. They had this NPR test that they had over 100 million people take, and they played 128, 320, and lossless wave file or FLAC files, or maybe they played wave files. And you know what people's average score was on the 6 things that they listened to? It was basically 50%, which means that they were guessing. So, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I listen to just on, like, cheap headphones. I do everything there. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, that's something I don't really care about. I mix in 44.1, 24-bit. That's what I do.
Okay, hold on. We have some questions here, but I'm not saying that that's bad though. I'm not,
But it's, I guess it depends on, like you say, what you're listening to it on. Like, I've been on a large format line array system and had an engineer who's had Fidelia, which is a 96 24-bit program, which has all the CD or albums you can buy. And they put it back to a Spotify, and it's night and day how much good it's gone. But it's, again, what you're listening to it on.
Right, and how many people are listening to it on a really nice system? Almost nobody. I mean, it's different than 4K because now 4K is being pushed as a consumer standard. Nice audio systems are not being pushed as a consumer
no,
standard.
I mean they've gotten worse.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And that's the world we live in. It's all about, once again, it's about convenience. People don't want to, people just don't have nice stereo systems. I have nice things to listen on, but they're not convenient to have, to hook up my phone to. Like, what do I listen? Would I go through Bluetooth or something? I don't even know. There's no cables to attach things. It's,
You could just get Beats by Dre.
I could get Beats.
Yeah, you could just do that and it solves all of our problems.
Okay, so we have a couple questions here. Who needs the pub when I can watch this? Awesome. Okay, is that a question? That's not a question.
No, that's not a question.
Okay, so all that funky Seinfeld bass guitar is done on a keyboard. Did you know that Seinfeld, though, they never played the same thing?
Yeah, the guy who does it changes the theme every episode based upon the cadence of Jerry Seinfeld's joke delivery in his opening monologue.
That's actually not. That's actually true.
Yeah, I'm not kidding. It's actually pretty amazing if you go and listen to. It's one of the best parts of Seinfeld. If you go and watch like old episodes of Seinfeld, is hearing how the bass line changes with the vocal cadence of Jerry Seinfeld.
Do people know that? Do anyone know Seinfeld, or are you too young for that? Do people still remember Seinfeld? I don't even know. But
No.
Did anyone notice that the bass is always different in the theme? Okay, I just thought it was that people noticed that, but. What is this topic? That's a question.
I don't, Rick, you were the one that invited. You said
That's
jump
one
on
of the
set.
that's
Here,
one of the
thank you,
questions here.
Jamie. Here.
I've got a question. Adam, I'd like to piggyback off of what that Anthony Jackson story you were telling. All right, so what about... No, it's not a joke. This is a serious question. No, it's all right. Hey, don't judge me. All right, so like imagine, like let's go back like 100 years, and we have like only acoustic instruments. Everyone's playing classical music. And then all of a sudden the electric guitar comes out, and they're like, oh no, here we go. All these guys are going to put us out of a job. But we still have classical music. It's just in its own
nobody
thing,
listens
right?
to it.
Yeah, it's at the university level pretty much. Or in Europe, I'll bet it's thriving here maybe.
In Germany, people listen to classical music.
Yeah. And then, same thing, computers start coming out and all the session guys, and everyone's like, oh no, here it comes. We're all about to lose our jobs. And it's like, well, I don't know. Do you see like maybe the same thing happening? Like, music just keeps evolving, and maybe there's not anything to worry about. It's just we're going to take that back seat, and the next technology is going to do its thing, and then on and on it goes. Or I don't know. What do you think?
Well, after computers write music for us, I don't know where else is there to go?
Yeah, there's this website you can go to. I forget where I found it, where it's an AI consistently improvising music in the style of Chopin. Poorly, but there are moments, like 5 to 10 seconds of like constantly improvising, 24 hours a day. But there are moments, like 5 to 10 second moments, where it's like, dang, that sounds pretty amazing. 5 to 10 years from now, who knows? But yeah.
And there's also, off of that, there's a website that you can subscribe to there's a computer that auto-generates music for you to sight read. Yeah. Now, they're very basic melodies, and it kind of, it works. It's just something for you to read at sight. But where it gets interesting is there's a mode in there where you can have 4 of them at once. You know what I mean? So you can do like a quartet, basically, is what it's intended for. But when you press play and you listen to it, and you're like, oh wow, there's real counterpoint happening in there, and like there's voice leading. And again, the melodies don't make sense, but you're like, I don't know. The technology's there and it's developing, and I don't know. I think it's scary. I think it's Skynet.
Well, to try and predict things whether technology is going to be able to achieve this. I don't ever try and predict that, because if you predict it, you're probably going to be wrong. Somebody said here, what do you prefer to listen on, good music on an analog setup or a cell phone? Well, I prefer to listen to it on an analog system with a power amp through my powered monitors.
I prefer listening to music like this 2 minutes before the gig, trying to learn the song. That's my mode.
But if I don't have that system, I listen to my music like that too. But I try and switch ears occasionally.
What's your...
Hey, actually, here's a practical one. When you're bouncing mixes, maybe for even your YouTube stuff, do you guys reference your mix on your phone and all that?
Of course.
I reference YouTube videos on my... I reference YouTube videos on my phone all the time. Yeah. Yes, I do. Yeah.
Okay, a couple more questions here. Any other questions from the audience?
Thanks. So what would interest me is you talked about the fear of some singer that came into your studio, like that she wouldn't accept any imperfections because she thought like people would find it weird. And and I think she has a point, because people are used now to music for a few decades that it's really perfected, like everything's on grid and the auto-tune thing. So do you actually think that new pop music coming out, having these imperfections, that people would actually find it weird, or it would not be as successful as perfected music? So do you think that people are so used to it now that you have to make it perfect?
I mean, yeah.
I think so. I think that if you kind of have to cleanse your palate and listen to some unfixed music. When I'm at the Falcons football game, I'm talking football.
Gridiron.
And I hear Back in Black being played over the stadium speakers. Everyone is moving, and because and if you were to put that on a grid and look at it, it's all over the place in a good way, and people move to it. But if you're listening to the radio and you're listening to Ariana Grande, and then it went into Back in Black, it would probably sound kind of weird. You're like, whoa, what is this? Not the singing. Brian Johnson's pretty in tune for his singing, but the beat. When you hear stuff that's unquantized, I think it sounds weird to people nowadays. It doesn't sound weird to me, but I think it sounds weird to most people.
I think that once we get used to a certain sound, like just the idea of compression, compressed vocals, or like just over, like the first time that an electric guitar was overdriven and recorded, that probably sounded pretty weird to somebody like Freddie Green. But then people got used to it, and then now to hear Freddie Green style chunk on the electric guitar, that would sound very strange. I think that's just the progress of music. And it's not even progress, it's just the forward momentum of music in time. So yes, tuning vocals is now very much the standard, and to go back to another way would just be dating the music. It's not wrong, right or wrong, it's just dating the music to another era where tuning vocals wasn't standard. Like even if the vocals are dead on, there's something about a tuned vocal which just sounds more modern to most people, and it's, not bad or not good, it's just what it is. I think that's usually how I think about things. Things are not bad or good. You have to accept what it is and then make your decisions after that.
I will say this, that being older than most of the people in here, when I listen to drums from the 70s that are all dead, in the 80s, we thought, oh man, that sounds so dated. But then by the 90s, we were like, nah, it's not so bad. Then by the 2000s, it was like, oh, that's cool. That sounds retro. Then people once again tried to get their drums to sound like that. But the things that always sounded good were the natural sounds. That's why John Bonham, that's why people like Led Zeppelin. Natural drum sounds never go out of style. I think a natural vocal take would really always withstand the test of time, kind of like wearing a black T-shirt. No, people could look at my videos in 30 years and say, he's wearing a black T-shirt. Okay, that's cool. They might say my hair looks weird, but I was around in the 70s and I had weird hair like everyone else, and the 80s. But you never know what things are going to sound like to people 20 years from now. So maybe all these tuned vocals are going to sound bizarre. Oh my God, that's so dated. That's so 2015 or whatever.
It's definitely going to be the case that way. Yeah. The 808, as awesome as an 808 sounds, is going to sound so dated in 10 years.
But the black T-shirt, by the way, Adam's Lick T-shirt is an awesome T-shirt.
Oh yeah, that will never
You
go
should
out of style. Yeah, the
definitely purchase some of those. I just have to put a little plug out there. I saw
Thanks,
it.
Rick.
It's some seriously nice material, and so I think that is. If there's not any more questions, I think we're going to conclude this. This has been a fantastic, GitCon 2018. Woo! We're going to have some blues tonight, and I'd like to thank Adam for being my co-host here. And
Thanks,
thank
Rick.
you all for coming here and get that Lick T-shirt. Thanks a lot.